Hello. All right. Today is another day of reading my book, Rebel. I'm happy to say we only have 4 more episodes of this before we move on to the next one. So I'm excited. I do have some news. I've had to push back my release on Youth, which is the 3rd book of the series. So instead of it coming out this Sunday, it will come out next Saturday. And the reason is because I hit a snag for a little while, and then just the other day I hit this light bulb moment, this brainstorming flash, I guess you could say. And I was able to write about 4,000 words in, let's see, 4 days. So 5 days, something like that. So I am a little disappointed in myself. I have about 16,000 more words to go, something like that. Maybe 15, but I think 16. And then, let's see. After I'm done writing, I'll have to edit real quick, format, upload by the 20th, which is next Tuesday. And then it'll be done. Yeah, I'm not too happy right now. But yeah. So we left off here where they came to the village where she got hurt, and then they moved on to the village where the fire happened. And here we go. Ready? Oh, and just so you know, spoiler alert, this journey is like a little confusing in some places, and I know that, and I am so sorry. I'm so sorry that it's a little confusing. It's a little confusing for me now that I've read over what I have to read today. But I'm making mental notes that I will go back and write down later. But I need to change things. All right. Things are crazy. I know. All right. So, getting ready. The journey continues. The trio unsaddled their horses and brushed them out. Katerina gave her mare an extra carrot as a reward for a good day, and she walked out of the stall to where the others were. "Shall we head out?" Jacob laughed, his face lighting up and little wrinkles appearing at the corners of his eyes. "Sure, Princess. It's not that far. Follow me." He led them out of the stables and down the hill to the next property. It was a large piece of land between the stables and where the old inn stood, and had a large 3-story building as the main house. "The family that lives here," said Jacob, "is a medium-sized family with 4 boys. They've owned this land for 100 years, passed down through the oldest son." He led them past the house, down a path to the guest house that had brand new paint on both floors. The house/inn was awesome. Sorry about that. Family. Okay. As he led them inside the inn, they stared at how cozy it looked. Jacob called out to a young woman, "Sarah, come and meet some travelers." He turned to the princess and the 2 princes. "She's a good lass. She always tries to be available to help everyone." A young-looking, middle-aged woman stepped out of a bedroom-turned-office and replied, "Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Jake." She turned to the others in the group. "Hello, my name is Sarah. I run the land with my husband and boys. How can I help you?" "Hello, my name is Eduardo. My companions and I would like to book 3 rooms for the night." He smiled at the woman. "Of course," she replied. She pulled a book from under the counter and flipped to the current day's sheet. "You're in luck. We only have 3 rooms left. Names?" "Eduardo, Dmitri, and Katerina," the princess responded, looking back to the woman after looking around at the inn. She smiled when the lady looked up. Sarah smiled at the group and wrote their names down for the rooms, before saying, "Let's show you the rooms, and then we can all eat dinner. How does that sound?" "Wonderful," Katerina laughed. She and the 2 princes followed Sarah up the stairs, down a hall to the end, and up to 3 rooms separated from the rest. "These are our special rooms, the ones we keep for special guests and royalty." She smirked because they hadn't needed to tell her that they were royal. She could see it in their stats, and in Eduardo's case, there was only one prince in that country with the name Eduardo. Sarah motioned to one room. "Prince Eduardo, this one is yours." She walked to the next room and invited Katerina to go in. "Princess, this one is for you." Then she led Dmitri to the last room. "Dinner is in 30 minutes, if you want to join us after putting away your things." "Thank you," said Dmitri gratefully. The others agreed, and they all went to their separate rooms. Dmitri's room was nice, a nice royal blue color and masculine. He nodded in satisfaction and put his bags on the dresser. He looked around his room, appreciating the decor, and then headed out of the room to see if they were ready for dinner. Hey, are you ready for dinner? I am, Katerina replied. She smiled. My room is amazing. Her room had a light blue color scheme. It had a beachy theme, so she really felt at ease. Eduardo nodded. I'm also a bit hungry. He thought his room was cool. It was a red color scheme. It wasn't up to his standards, though. He followed the two others, thinking about how Katerina didn't seem to be responsive to him. He was a bit angry about that, so he decided to try something to get her to look at him. The three walked back down the hall and down the stairs to the main floor. Katerina looked around and saw someone walk into the room. Excuse me, where is the dining room? The young girl smiled. It's over here. I was just heading there myself. My mummy's there. She led the three royals down 2 doors and pushed open the third door. Mommy, we're here. I brought the lovely princess. The adults laughed. Then the girl's mom, the cook, set down the last dish and said, Thank you, Lisa. Katerina led the others into the room. Thank you, Lisa. You're welcome, princess. The girl ran over to her mother and sat down at the table. Dmitri pulled out a chair for Katerina. When she blushed a little and smiled while sitting, he smiled back. Thanks, Katerina said, trying not to blush too much as she stared at the table. You're welcome, he responded, sliding her chair forward. He tried not to blush as well as he sat down. Then he noticed Eduardo's frown and sighed. Things were going to be a bit rough with the two guys from now on. He couldn't believe that things were so uptight between them. Should he do something about it? Maybe he should have a peaceful chat with Eduardo to see if they could come to an understanding. Maybe he should leave it be and see where it went from there. Dmitri was so lost in thought that he didn't realize that dinner was over and that he had eaten all of his food until Katerina placed a small hand on his arm. Are you okay? She asked. She watched him nod and, turning to their host, excused the three of them. They all went to bed with full bellies and lots on their minds. Day 3. Eduardo woke up the next morning with a frown. Today he had to get her attention and her affection. He clenched his fists at the thought of her running into Dimitri's arms. He would have her if it was the last thing he did. He was tired of patiently waiting for her to notice him, and if she refused him, it would only make it more fun for him in the long run. Although he would put the second part of his new plan in motion later, after they got to her castle. He was looking forward to it. Eduardo got out of bed, showered in the cold spray, and got dressed. He was ready. Katerina and Dmitri had just arrived in the main hall of the temporary inn when a voice from above stopped them. Katerina turned and saw Eduardo coming down the stairs with his bags. Good morning, Eduardo, she smiled slightly. Good morning, Katerina, he replied happily. He turned to Dmitri. Good morning. Good morning, Dmitri nodded to him. He was a little curious at Eduardo's good mood. You are in a good mood, Katerina noticed. Eduardo nodded. It's a beautiful day and I took a cold shower. He grinned. May I escort you to breakfast, princess? He bowed slightly, getting her to laugh. Of course. She thought that he was finally done being all moody, so she was a little bit more relaxed around him. She thought that she had made her choice with Dmitri, but with Eduardo's change in attitude, she wasn't so sure. Eduardo held out his arm and smiled when she placed her hand in the crook of his elbow before he led her to the dining room. Their bags were by the main door, just waiting for their journey that day. Dmitri followed them with a small frown, but he was happy that Eduardo wasn't mad anymore. He sat down on Katerina's other side and filled his plate. He was hungry. Eduardo held Katerina's attention all through the meal, which he was glad for. He spoke with her at great length, keeping her mind on him as she ate, and when the three were done, they thanked the cook for the meal. Eduardo and the others walked back to the front door, where Eduardo paid for the rooms, and then they left to go get their horses. It was time for them to get back on their journey. They had 12 days, including today, until they made it to Katerina's castle, and Eduardo was hoping to make the most of it. Katerina was flattered by the attention, but she wondered why Dmitri seemed to have backed off. She frowned slightly. What was she going to do with the two princes when they got back to her family castle? They were so confusing right now. Okay, just a second. They were so confusing right now, and she still didn't know who she was going to choose. On one hand, she liked how sweet Dmitri was. On the other hand, Eduardo was happier now and was acting more reliable in a way. It was a bit weird, but kind of okay. Okay. Something's going on with Facebook right now. She would have to see how things ended up on the journey. The trio walked out of the inn, down to the village stables, and got their horses ready to go. Dmitri watched his companions with such a strong concentration that he didn't get up in the saddle until after they did. Uneasiness. What's wrong, Dmitri? Katerina asked. She was worried about him. He had stared into space for a while before getting into his saddle, so she was confused as to if he was sick or not. Dmitri cleared his throat. Nothing, Katerina. I'm fine. He wondered if they would say anything more about his inattentiveness. Would life be easier on this trip if Eduardo was his usual self? Why did Eduardo suddenly turn into a happy-go-lucky person? Was he up to something? Katerina nodded. She was still worried, but she decided to leave it for now. The trio rode their horses out of the village and through the gate. Katerina took the lead this time, worried that Dmitri's absent-mindedness that with Dmitri's absent-mindedness, he would forget where to go. They rode for miles, straight to the west, and Katerina was getting worried about how long this would take. She wondered what her family was doing at this moment, and whether they would be fine when she got there. This trip, only supposed to be 14 days, seemed like it was taking forever. Where was the bad guy while they traveled home? What was he doing? These thoughts ran through Katerina's mind as the two princes followed her. Where should we make our next stop? She asked. I think, Eduardo said, that we should stop for the night on the way to my capital city. So, We should stop at the next village for a break, get some food, get some water, and rest our horses. He sped his horse up to catch up with Katerina. I am so going to have to redo this. Okay. Okay, she replied. Let's do that. She decided that she was going to go with Eduardo's plan to stop at the next village. She did not see the look on Dimitri's face when she agreed. Dimitri was suspicious of Eduardo. He was worried that Eduardo was planning to do this for various reasons. He couldn't pinpoint to why or when he started to get suspicious. He just knew that he was. It wasn't long until they reached the next village. They dismounted and tied their horses up at the gate to the village. Katerina looked around while the boys got food and water. They noticed that there were no men in the village, and the women were slowly coming out of their houses. One woman got close, seeming to want to know what was going on, and asked, "Who are you?" Katerina replied, "I am Princess Katerina. We are on our way back to my country to protect my family. Someone has been sending threatening letters to them, and I have been on a journey to find out who sent those letters. My companions are out getting food and water right now, and they should be back soon. Once we are fed and rested, we will be moving on. May I ask why there are no men in your village?" The woman looked at the princess in wonder. "Your Highness," she said. She curtsied and then spoke again. "You and your companions are safe here. Our men are gone. A man came to our village one day and spent a few days here. He wanted to talk about needing men to help him fight a battle. I don't know why he said that we have to help him fight this war, but he took every single man and boy over the age of 16 with him. I don't know where they are, and I don't know when they will be back." Katerina placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. "I am sorry to hear that," she said. "I am afraid that the man that is threatening my family is the same one that has taken your men. We will find him and we will get your men back. Hopefully we can get them before anyone dies." When the woman gasped, Katerina spoke up quickly. "I don't mean that my family will set out to kill your village men. I mean, if this battle does end up with deaths, I will do my best to make sure that your men come home safe." The woman sighed. "Very well, Princess. We will stock you up on food and water, enough for the three of you and your horses, just until you get to your country if possible." "I don't know how long that will be, but I hope the food lasts. Thank you for trying to get our boys back. Maybe when this is all over, we can get together to celebrate." "That sounds great," she said. "I just wish all of this wasn't happening." Katerina looked up when her two companions came back. She stepped towards Dmitri and asked him, "Did they let you know about their men? I believe it's the same guy that was threatening my family." Dmitri agreed. "It has to be," he said. He looked into her eyes and let her know that he supported her in whatever decision she made. He, also, was worried about the men of this village, also hearing that the boys that were 16 to 18 years old, about the boys. He wondered if they would make it back home. Eduardo was silent during this conversation, but he was listening. The woman speaking to them shook her head. "I am so sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Celise. I run this village in the place of my late husband. My oldest son is to take over when he turns 18. He's one of the ones taken." Her son was only 16 years old. The three traveling royals all replied at once. Nice to meet you, Sleaze. That hadn't been planned at all. Katerina smiled. She was glad that she had another reason to find and fight the bad guy. She would do it for the men and boys taken from this village. She would do her best to bring them all back. Celeste had her women pack up about 2 weeks' worth of food. She also had them pack plenty of water. Hopefully, the food will last all three of them for 2 weeks. Katerina packed the saddlebags with food and water, then watched as the boys packed their things. They had all let their horses rest without saddles, so they quickly put the saddles back on. It wasn't a long break from the journey, but they were anxious to get back on the road. Katerina said, "Come on, we have people to save and a bad guy to capture." She smiled slightly at the quest they now had. Dmitri snorted out a laugh and smiled back at her. She was so cute. He replied, "Sure thing, princess." He smirked playfully at her blush. This time, Eduardo led the way. He led them away from the village as they waved goodbye to the women. He led them through the countryside towards and past his capital city. The journey was a long one. It was a few days from the village with the taken men to the capital city. About 4 days. 4 days of the same scenery, 4 days of silence, 4 days of boredom. Katerina stared at the sight ahead of her. It was a nice village. It was the end of day 7 of their trip back to her castle, and she was tired of traveling. "How good is the inn here?" she asked. "It's a good place," Eduardo replied. He glanced at her. "The beds are big, the inn is clean, and the people running it are nice." Katerina nodded. "That's good." Dmitri finished looking around. "Are you okay, Katerina?" "Yeah, Katerina." "I'm fine, just a little tired." Katerina didn't know it, but she had slight circles under her eyes. The boys looked worried. "What?" Dmitri shook his head. "We should eat and check into the inn before you head to bed. You need your rest." "Okay." She nodded, and they headed towards the inn. She was too tired to argue. On the way, they dropped their horses off at the village stables, where the stable hands took care of them and grabbed their bags to take to the inn. When they got to the inn, Eduardo asked for 3 rooms and a meal. The trio ate together, starving after a long ride. Katerina leaned over onto Dmitri when she was finished eating, feeling sleepy now that she was full. Dmitri smiled down at Katerina. "I'll take her to her room when I'm done eating." He quickly finished and gently picked her up, standing from the bench seat. Dmitri walked over to the stairs, carrying the almost asleep princess up to the rooms they were given. He carefully balanced her as he opened the door to her room. Then he walked in to lay her on the bed. "Sleep well." He kissed her forehead and turned to leave. Then he heard a sound. Turning his head, he noticed that Katerina was staring at him with pink cheeks and a hand over her mouth. Her eyes wide with shock. Then he left the room quickly. Final Destination Part 1. Katerina stared at the now closed door, wondering what made him kiss her forehead. She thought it was sweet, but it took her by surprise. She spent a couple of hours wondering about what she was going to do before sleep pulled her under its grasp. She slept so soundly that she didn't hear her companions go to bed, nor the intruder later coming into her room to grab something from her bag. Day 8. And this is okay. Katerina woke up when light started brightening up her room. Only 6 more days, plus this one, until they reached her castle, and Katerina was excited. She stretched and got out of bed. Looking back, she was amazed at how fast the journey seemed. Life had a way of surprising you, she thought. The final leg of their journey would be filled with anticipation. Katerina got dressed as she thought about what the next few days would bring. However, when she went to look in her bags, she noticed that one of the food bags was gone. How did that happen? Who would take one bag of food? That was half their food for the trip. She was confused and upset about this theft. She grabbed her bags and hurried out of the room. Going next door, she knocked on Dimitri's door. When he answered the door, she said, "Someone has been in my room. They went through my bags and took one of the food bags. Somehow, we have to get through 7 days with half the food that we started out with this journey." Dimitri frowned. "I don't know who could have done this," he said. He ran a hand through his hair and looked down at her. "Hopefully," he said, "we will find out who did this, but I wouldn't count on it. We know how to hunt, so there's that. Let me get dressed and I will meet you downstairs." Eduardo listened from down the hall. He got dressed, grabbed his bags, and followed Katerina down. "So, what happened last night?" Katerina did not tell him about the kiss to the forehead, but she did tell him about the bag of food that was stolen. What were they going to do? Huh. Eduardo shook his head. "I guess we follow what Dimitri said," he said. "We have a few days left of our journey, and we can always hunt or fish for food." Katerina nodded. It seemed logical. They didn't have to wait long until Dimitri reached them.
You okay?
Yeah.
Headache?
Just trying to remember where I left off. They didn't have to wait long until Dimitri reached them, and so they made their way out of the inn and into the village stables. Soon their horses were ready for them, and they were ready to head out. Katerina looked at her companions and said, "Let's go." Dimitri led the way. He also was anxious, but he believed that they would make it. For breakfast they ate meat strips. It wasn't much, but it was enough just to keep them going. He kept glancing around, watching for danger, but no danger came. Still, he didn't relax. Katerina and Eduardo noticed his body language and weren't too worried. They were glad that someone was keeping an eye out. They rode behind Dmitri and spoke of whatever came to mind. Katerina also tried to include Dmitri in their talk. She wanted to see what he thought. Dmitri let himself be drawn into the conversation. "I think my sisters are driving my parents crazy," he said in response to Katerina's question of what they thought was happening at home. He smiled. "My sisters are wild ones. Even the proper ones are a bit wild." He laughed a little. Katerina laughed. "My older brothers are probably doing patrols with the army or helping take care of the younger ones. My parents are probably terrified in my mother's case, or strategizing in my father's case." She frowned slightly at the thought of what her pregnant mother must be going through. Come to think of it, her mother must be almost 7 months pregnant by now. "What's wrong?" Eduardo asked. "Just wondering how my mother is." "She's almost 7 months pregnant, if my math is right." Katerina smiled slightly. "Oh," Dmitri said, "my mother is about 5 months pregnant. She hadn't really been showing when they were there, but she probably would be soon." "She is?" Katerina was a little surprised. Dmitri nodded. "Yes, she barely had a bump when we were there, so you wouldn't have noticed. It's okay. I just hope she's doing well while I'm gone." "I'm sure she's fine," Eduardo commented. Katerina nodded. "Yes, I think she's doing well, but I understand why you're worried." Dmitri smiled at the other two. "Thanks." They rode, taking small breaks when needed for longer breaks for food. They were trying to make the food last. Sometimes they would add meat from hunting or fishing. They stretched the food out until the end of day 12, when they made it across the border into Katerina's country. Since the stolen food incident, 4 days before, they had been eating a little less since they weren't sure that they'd be able to hunt enough. "We're almost there," Katerina exclaimed. A smile lit her face as they crossed into her country. It wouldn't be long until they needed to stop, though, because it was getting late. "Yes, Eduardo," replied Eduardo. "Let's stop for the night and then continue on in the morning." "Sounds good." Dmitri stopped his horse. Katerina sighed but stopped as well. "I suppose that we should, even though I just want to ride until we get home. I know that you're logical. We all need the rest, and our horses do too." They got settled down, their horses sleeping already, and ate a late dinner with the last of their food. Dmitri took the last shift of night watch and couldn't help but be amazed at the sun shining on the land as it rose in the sky. He wrote a short but heartfelt letter to his parents, hoping to send it when he got a chance. Day 13. Katerina led the way this time. Her idea was to get to the village where her cousin was the Duchess before nightfall. She was so excited to see her family again. She couldn't wait to hug her parents or her brothers. What have they been up to while she was gone? Were they still getting the letters? Did they have any clues as to who was threatening them? What would they say about her adventure? She was worried about telling them because of her mother being heavily pregnant. Maybe she should just tell her father and older brothers. Dmitri looked at her. She seemed so happy, and she had every right to be. She was going home after 4 months of being away. He smiled, happy for her. He called up to Katerina and rode by her side. He thought about their journey and how much they went through in the last 4 months. Boy, did they have trouble pinpointing the description of that bad guy. No one could agree on a description until they were halfway through Eduardo's country. Dmitri didn't understand that at all. A figure watched as the three royals rode through the countryside towards the capital. They watched and planned out what to write in the letter in their hand. Smirking, they put pen to paper and wrote a small paragraph. Then they called a hawk down to take the letter to the recipient in a different country. The figure was noticed by one of the riders, but didn't worry. Eduardo was riding next to Katerina and Dmitri. He was happy that the princess was showing an interest in him now. He looked over at her and smiled, wishing she would look at him. Katerina couldn't wait until she could get just that much closer to her castle. She missed everyone, and she was a little worried over how they were. She glanced over at Dmitri and then at Eduardo. They were her rocks in this weird moment of time. She was glad that they were there supporting her. Even Eduardo, who was a little standoffish at first, was being so supportive now. She smiled. They kept riding towards the night's stop, hoping that they made it before the bad guy got to Katerina's country. As the day passed, they made stops for water and food, letting their horses rest. Dmitri patted his front pocket where the letter was, hoping that he could finally send it when they stopped for the night. It was several hours later that they reached the village, and Dmitri said, "I want to send this letter before we meet up with the lord and lady." "Okay," Katerina said, looking out over the village. She was happy to be so close to home. There were still people out and about, but not many. The night market was just starting up, and Dmitri was talking to the postmaster, who would send a night messenger with the letter. As her gaze swept the village, she looked up at the lord's house and the hill it was on. Behind that hill was her cousin's mansion. She hadn't really met her cousin before, because their relationship was so distant. With such a huge family, it wasn't unusual for family members to not know each other. She sighed. Maybe one day they would meet. Final Destination, Part 2. Dmitri came back to them and said, "Okay, I'm done." "Very well, let's go." Katerina led the way up the hill to the lord and lady's house. Its bright yellow exterior looked almost gray in the dusk. Katerina dismounted, the guys following, and called for stable hands. When their horses were taken care of, Katerina knocked on the door. "Yes?" asked the butler. "Princess Katerina, you're home." "I am," Katerina replied. She smiled at the butler. "May we see the lord and lady Boiti?" "Of course. Let me go get them. Come in and sit down in the sitting room." "Thank you." The three tired travelers stepped inside the house and walked over to the sitting room while the butler went upstairs. Katerina and her companion sat on the large sofa. A few minutes later, a voice was heard from the doorway. "Princess?" "It is Lady Boiti." She and her husband stepped into the room and walked over to a love seat near the trio. "How are you? How was the journey? Did you find out who was threatening you?" "Honey," let her answer. Lord Boiti laughed, placing a hand over hers. He smiled when she blushed. "We're fine, just tired. The journey was long and a bit crazy." "No, we didn't find out who was threatening my family, but we do have a description of him." She looked at Lord Boiti. "May we stay the night, my lord? We will leave in the morning to reach the castle." "Of course," he replied. "Our home is your home for the night." Is there anything else we can do to help? Like food? Lady Boati asked. Food sounds wonderful, Dmitri replied, looking at his companions and getting nods from them both. He turned back to their hosts. Thank you so much. You're welcome, Prince Dmitri. Lady Boati rang a small bell and a maid appeared. Marissa, please bring some dinner for our guests. Thank you. Marissa curtsied and left. The group talked about the journey, the fight, the fire, the dates, the meeting the prince's families, and meeting the prince's families. When the food came, the travelers thanked Marissa wholeheartedly. They ate quickly, but without making a mess. Then Lord Boiti said, It's getting late. Perhaps we should get to bed so we can start the day early. Katerina agreed. Yes, let's. They all got up while Marissa came to get their dishes and walked upstairs, where they were led to their bedrooms for the night. Katerina set her bags down and got ready for bed. She was exhausted. As soon as her head touched the pillow, she was out like a light. As soon as the sun brightened up the room the next morning, and Katerina stretched as she woke up. She was going home today. She grinned and jumped out of bed, grabbing her clothes and changing. Good morning, Princess, Lady Boiti greeted her when she appeared in the dining room. How did you sleep? The others were in the dining room already and eating. I slept like a baby, thank you. Katerina walked over to the table and sat on Lady Boiti's right. After they ate, the trio of travelers thanked their hosts once more and apologized for having to leave so soon. They grabbed their bags and went outside to get their horses. Katerina loved on her horse, saying, We're going home, girl. Then she mounted up, and they took off towards the castle. It took a few hours, but they reached the village that surrounded the castle and were recognized by the villagers. Everyone was cheering them as they rode past on their way up the hill toward the three-story castle. Almost there, Dmitri said. Eduardo agreed. He was looking forward to what came next. Katerina led the way up the hill, seeing the castle get bigger and bigger as they got closer. She was a little nervous now. She saw people coming out of the stables and pointing at her group. She smiled and waved, letting them know that she was back, and they waved to her as well. Dun dun dun. All right, so the next chapter is called The Beginning of the End. How did you like it? I thought it was pretty cool. Just marking what I got to on the list. So, yep, that is that. We are so close. We have Friday, Monday, Wednesday, and the next Friday. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I had hoped to have my third book, Youth, come out this Sunday, but it looks to be coming out next Saturday, which is the day after this is finished. And I'm stressing out a little bit, but I hope to have everything done by Monday and then upload it on Tuesday. So, and if you see me looking up here, it's because I'm looking up at my Google Calendar that I printed out blank and then marked with what days I need to finish what by. So, oh boy. July is halfway through and we're still panicking. I tried to put my book back and knocked my fan over. Which in turn knocked my remote over. Fun. Alright, so that is the end of today's reading. I will get back with you on Friday for our next reading. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day. I shall see you next time. Bye-bye.